absolutely vital that oil companies, major oil companies like Shell or anyone else operating in the North Sea or Scottish, are very, very open and transparent.
See, I'm sorry, I just want to jump in there. You see, I'm curious to know in terms of how regulated these platforms are by the UK government. There's some reports that indicate 50% of the platforms that are out there that are too old to be out there and that are prone to some sort of leakage, some sort of damage.
We've been having the same conversation for years. The BP Gulf of Mexico spill in 2010. The Piper Alpha disaster in 1988. Unimaginable environmental and human catastrophes. These are the disasters too big to ignore. They hit our news screens every decade, and each time the industry says it was a freak accident that won't happen again. But oil spills are constant. We're not talking every decade, we're talking daily. In fact, the vast majority of spills won't make the news at all. Hundreds of oil slicks happening just offshore, near continuously, out of sight and out of mind. Drip feeding our oceans with toxic chemical compounds that nobody is cleaning up, nobody is talking about, and nobody is being prosecuted for. And it's all happening right here at home. This is a satellite image identified by the SkyTruth Oil Pollution Monitoring System of a North Sea oil field in July 2024.
This line of bright spots, they're very likely oil platforms. And then 3 of them at least are trailing these long dark streaks. Each one of those slicks is about 10 kilometers long. It can have a lot of substances in it. It's sort of a chemical soup.
Multiple slicks, all from different sources, in the same area, releasing oil, heavy metals, and toxic chemicals into our oceans at the same time. And this isn't even rare. One repeat offender is Piper Bravo, the replacement rig of Piper Alpha, which is the rig that caused the deaths of 167 people and a catastrophic oil spill in the 80s.
This is the story of Piper B and Saltire A.
We're here to produce oil efficiently and safely. We intend to achieve operational standards that will be a flagship for the rest of the North Sea.
The next generation is here.
Satellite imagery of the rig over the course of last year reveals an alarming pattern. Of the 120 images taken of the rig, oil can be seen on the sea surface in more than a quarter of them. The rig's owned by a company that has discharged oil in breach of its permits more than any other since 2021. They have faced no penalties.
Only the oil companies know where each bit of oil is coming from realistically. We can't tell that from the land. It could be accidental spills, it could be the ships servicing the rigs, or it could be produced water, which is this oily byproduct that they have permission, they have permits to release this oily byproduct into the sea, but sometimes they're breaching those permits. In fact, quite a lot of the time they're breaching those permits.
There was a recent review actually that looked at the toxic chemicals that can be associated or released within produced water. And they found over 1,000 different toxic chemicals. They do bioaccumulate and they persist in the food chain. They can cause cancer, they can impact the reproductive system, so reduce fertility, increase chances of stillbirth or abortion. They can suppress the immune system, so increase the likelihood that an animal might die from an infectious disease or just more generally debilitate them. They can also be what's known as endocrine disruptors, so they can affect an animal's hormone imbalance, and you can imagine that has a huge number of different physiological impacts. And then they can also impact behavior, so they can make an animal more likely to be caught by a predator, so reduce their flee response, and they can also impact their ability to catch prey and feed.
There's technology that exists so that they don't have to release this produced water. There's no justification whatsoever. It's disgusting, really, that it's allowed to be released into the sea.
I worry for the marine environment because I care deeply about it, but I also worry from a sort of human health perspective that we're going to be contaminated by eating the food that we source from our ocean, and I think that's a freedom that's been taken away from us, particularly in relation to girls and women that want to have children. The NHS have a guideline on limiting the amount of specific types of oily fish that you eat because of some of the industrial chemicals that are present in those fish to make sure that they're not passed on to future generations. And it makes me not only worried, but also really angry that that's the case.
Shell has been fined more than £22,000 in relation to a leak at a North Sea platform in 2011. More than 200 tonnes of oil was reported to have leaked from the Gannet Alpha platform, located 113 miles from Aberdeen.
There have been hundreds of oil spills reported in the last few years. And then on top of that, there have been hundreds more breaches of permit conditions, so the limits set on how much oil they're allowed to release into the sea. There have been 2 fines or convictions in the last 5 years. One of those was so small, it equated to about 1.5 hours of the CEO's time for that year.
I live in the city of Dundee in Scotland, and this is where we are. This is Dundee. This coastline, you can see there is obviously a big influence of oil and gas. We have the oil and gas rigs that come in for maintenance work, and that's what we have right here. We are not able to be on these oil rigs looking at what is happening. So we need to have transparency, but we also need the government to be able to hold these big businesses and corporations accountable for what is happening. We need to be making sure that there are consequences for this and that those consequences match the devastation that is happening because of this chronic pollution.
If you're down on the water, a 10-kilometer long oil slick is not a trivial feature to come across. If you're in a boat or if you're a dolphin or whale or fish. We're talking about companies in an industry that are making billions of dollars in profit every year. So for me, this continued sloppy operation is inexcusable.
It can feel a little hopeless. What's the point in me washing out my yogurt pots or going to take my jeans to get mended when they've got a hole in them, when we know that there are huge amounts of pollution happening, often out of sight, and at a scale much bigger than anything that we could counterbalance. And it can feel really deflating and frustrating, and it tips people into that eco-anxiety that we talk about, which feels like we will never be able to solve this if we don't get the big players involved.
As long as there's oil and gas infrastructure in UK waters, the government needs to have an iron grip over what is happening. They need to take charge. These companies can do and do a huge amount of damage, and the government has an opportunity to take action and protect our seas.